Thanks for coming, you guys, and I'm really excited to share this with you. This is my website if you guys see it, but the presentation today, presenter view. So the presentation today is basically why you should be adding professional habits. Oh wait, that's just the wrong one, sorry. I guess it's not presenter view, there we go. Why you should be adding professional habits into your daily flying. This completely revolves around just encouraging safe flying practices. I talked with a few of you before we got started. Mainly selfishly, I want to keep flying for the rest of my life, and I don't want people that make dumb decisions ruin it for everybody else, essentially. So I'm a big proponent in safe habits and safe flying, right? Representing yourself in aviation, right? Unfortunately, we are a small breed of people in the United States and the world, right? And so how we can represent ourselves better for the public, for one, they might like us a little bit more, and two, so that we actually don't restrict ourselves accidentally, right? That goes into many different details, such as, you guys know the battles that a lot of small airports have. One in particular is Santa Monica? The one down, or whatever that Santa one of the California, the LA ones, right? It's been restricted and noise abatement after noise abatement. I've flown in there, and it's sad. It's sad to see like the history on one side and regulation on the other, right? And them just trying to destroy that thing. So a lot of that comes from that, and flying is a part of that as well. I did a little introduction, CFI MEI, multi-single complex, and that's one of the phenoms I flew. We flew 10 airplanes. I think we flew 10 different airplanes. So anything ranging from straight 300s to 300Es. The 300Es can go up to 45,000 feet at 0.8 Mach, which is it's fast. It's super fast. The fastest I ever got on the ground speed was 600 knots across the ground. We were going eastbound, Central Ohio to landing in Boston in 30 minutes. It was fantastic. Super fan. And that was with an approach and everything too. So let's get into it. Okay, so general aviation. Accident rates and understanding why they happen, right? So who's here heard about the airlines being the safest form of transportation, right? We should all have. And in fact, and I say this later on, you've probably heard that you're more likely getting into a car accident on your way to the airline than you are actually crashing the airplane, right? So why is that? Well, it's due to their high levels of standardization. Obviously, they have money and equipment that they can throw at that, but they also have high levels of professionalism, standardization, training, and just cohesiveness among the companies, right? And regulations that keep them safe, right? And you hold yourself up to this high standard, and it allows you to be a lot safer, right? It eliminates a lot of it. As we see in general aviation, if you look on this one, almost 70% of all general aviation accidents are pilot related. It's kind of the same with cars, right? Most car accidents are person related to driver related, right? So if 70% are our fault, then we are obviously the problem. Not necessarily the problem we should replace us, but we can always do better and learn, right? Over the last 20 years or so, you can see that on the accidents have been declining since 2002 is when the study started. However, you can see in the last 10 years that it's kind of stagnated. It's kind of flattened out, right? So I ask myself, when I see that, I see, okay, well, great, we're going in the right trajectory, but why? Why is it flattened out? On top of that, the fatal accident rates are kind of staying the same, right? A little bit less from up here, but, so now all of a sudden we have accidents that are still occurring, and we have people that are dying, right? And when people die, the public gets all pissed off, and, and then we get attacked, right? So we really want to watch that. We really, really want to mitigate that, right? Obviously, no one wants to die. So aircraft accidents by event, the number one most accidents is power plant failure. Now, that's not necessarily pilot related. It might be, depending on your maintenance routine, right? The second one is loss of control on the ground, which is ironic or kind of interesting. And then the second one is third one, loss of control in flight. However, I don't like how they did this graph because it makes the loss of control, well, by accident rate, it is the third, but that's the most fatal, which is the most important, right? So loss of control in flight is the most occurring accident, right? Which is obviously not good. Let's see here. I think on my next slide. So if pilots are the number one cause, then what can we do, right? So we start by adding layers of safety, but how and what do we add? right? And this is a rabbit hole that you can deep dive down into. It's basically it's a never-ending cycle that you could go down. I'm not saying we should go all the way down to the bottom and have 121 level standards and Part 91 operations. However, you can be very strict or relax about it. Who here? Anybody know Mike Patey? Mike Patey? Only one, really? Okay. Mike Patey is a aviation YouTuber, engineer. I don't have to give him a backstory. He's cool. I've met him at Oshkosh before. He is probably the most ADHD person I've ever met, yet has a medical and can fly. No idea how that happens, but actually probably like me. I have ADHD. I'm sure I have ADHD, but my parents just said, he's hyper. So I thank God my parents did that. So, because I've had many students that get screwed over because they had, they were, tested or whatever positive. So he is extremely risk averse. He's probably the safest risk analysis, you could call it, risk mitigating general aviation pilot there is. Now, he has quite the credential. He's a multimillionaire. He's an engineer. He's an architect. He does everything. He's a little bit of everything, but he flies Pilatuses. He has, backcountry planes. He built a plane called Draco. I don't know if you guys heard of that airplane. This is that guy, right? And he also crashed Draco. So this guy, he has these high levels of standard, and he just did a talk recently. Look up his channel on YouTube. It's Mike Patey, really easy. He did a 30-minute presentation about safety, and I think the caption is he lost 2 or 3 friends in the last 60 days, which is obviously gut-wrenching, right? So listen to that. Find the time, find the 30 minutes. It's a really amazing talk. But he talks about in that, I won't say the whole thing, but he talks about a 3-strike rule. And a 3-strike rule, right off the bat, says to me, it's like, okay, well, bad weather, obviously, strike 1. Bad engine, sure, strike 2, right? I kind of think of it that way. He takes it as far as, I'm a little bit sleepy, strike 1. It's nighttime, strike 2, is what he says, right? And now all of a sudden, in the instrument world, he's going in the clouds, strike 3, he cancels his flight, right? Now, I'm not saying that you should do that, but I'm saying that's a level of standard that works for him. And he also will admit that he came to that conclusion because he is alive right now. And he talks about how a lot of us, who here's heard the saying, there's old pilots and there's bold pilots, but no old, bold pilots? And if you break that down, it's a kind of sad thought. But anyway, on a different note, airlines and chartering cargo, right? The 121 world, the 135 world, why are they so safe, right? Well, it's because they're very risk averse, right? They have risk mitigation softwares. They have, there is probably teams upon teams of people that just are all about how to mitigate risk, right? And they do that mainly through SOPs, recurrent training, like I talked about, risk mitigation software, right? Standardization. That's the main part of it. Now, recently, you guys can come in if that's not okay. Never mind. So other than that, it's I talk about on the very bottom end. Now, like, you can ask me about it afterwards. There's certain social media influencers. Don't get me on that soapbox, but social media influencers that use their platform for views over safety. You're on the wrong side of my friends list, essentially. There was one recently. I won't get into it too much. You can look it up. He had an engine failure. Welcome. He had an engine failure, and he decided to pull out his cell phone and started recording while flying a 152, slipping his airplane, coming into land. And yeah, and on top of that, he needed flaps, right? So he decided to put down his phone, put in the flaps, pick up his phone, and continue recording, right? Everybody here, I think, could agree that's stupid. Very stupid. Now, if there is a GoPro on the windshield recording and just so happens to catch your engine failure, by all means, that's fine. But it's this back here. It's not distracting you, right? And of course, the internet. Okay, I'm getting on my soapbox. The internet praised him, right? But there were certain people like myself that commented on it and said, like, represent yourself higher. And on top of that, he has 130,000 people following him. Very impressionable people too, right? So represent yourself higher, right? You have an audience, big, like, what is it? Spider-Man always said, lots of responsibility, or power comes responsibility, right? So long story short, he responded to me, and he displayed about 4-ish hazardous attitudes. So we'll just leave it at that. So anyway, that's what it was. I'm not trying to infringe on your freedoms. And yes, someone has, in fact, I'm quoting that from them. They said, basically, long story short, I was the chief flight instructor and the safety officer for a Three Forks Flying Club in Bozeman for about a year, 2 years. And I came up with a standardization checklist because there was a meeting one time that we all started talking about operations in the pattern, and every single person had a different operation, right? One person even firewalled it in the pattern, which is not good. So I wrote up this. I spent lots of time. I was really proud of it. I actually brought it. It's in my backpack. I'll show that in a sec. This checklist, I was super proud of it for the club. And he wrote me about a 6-paragraph email saying that basically I'm infringing on his freedoms as an individual. I was just trying to help him out. That's all. So again, I just want to be safer. So the question here, if you see any bold text, that's kind of my questions here. So maybe if I get on a soapbox, just remind me. But what are some ways that you think of right off the bat, based on this first slide, that we can add safety, adding layers of professionalism, adding safety? Bruce?
By flying with another pilot.
Flying with another pilot.
Guys here, because you're going to learn, no matter what stage they are at, you're going to learn things from them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I actually have a slide about that saying that that could equally be bad depending on the experience, right? If you get 200-hour pilots, you know, it's probably not the best, but without training.
Just a general comment about SOPs.
Yes.
I flew with SkyWest Airlines for 12 years.
Yes.
They were so standard that you could plug and play crew members in about a 2-minute briefing, like how the captain would like things run, and that's all it took to get everybody on the same page.
Absolutely.
So standard. So everybody knows what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Do it the same way all the time.
Absolutely, 100%. At Summit, it was interesting flying 135. We had, a fleet of 10 airplanes. I think we have 11 now. I don't remember. But jumping from captain to captain, it's not, well, sometimes you're with the same captain forever or you jump around a little bit. I had the luxury of doing both. And it was interesting figuring out what captains liked what. And I was kind of in the phase of growing. So while I was a charter pilot, we had like 4 or 5 airplanes. Like we pretty much doubled our fleet, right? With that, obviously, comes a lot more SOPs that you need to implement. So I saw that implementation process, which was super fascinating. And you do have pilots that are stuck in their ways, and they're like, I don't want to do that. That's stupid. But over time, everybody's on the same, like Peter said. It's pretty phenomenal. Yeah, exactly. Let's not get on the soapbox of us, of other people ruining it for us. But the keyboard warriors are true and real. So, okay. So starting with the basics, who has flown an aircraft with like super worn out checklists or very vague checklists? Probably most of us, right? I flew in one. I rented an airplane down in California. I was taking my girlfriend's family flying. It was going to be awesome. It was the only flight school that would actually rent to somebody just off the street. I was a charter pilot at the time, so I had credentials. But man, I got in that airplane, and the door wouldn't lock shut. Right, every time you would lock it, and then 20 minutes later, just go, and then you'd lock it again, and this kind of thing. And the interior was falling apart, and I'm like, okay, where's the checklist? And you grab it, and it disintegrates in your hand. Right, it's bad. So obviously, checklists are super important, right? So what is the proper use of checklists? Who can tell me? Use it. Okay, use it for one. Should we fixate on it? No. Should we read it like a script and say, okay, mixture? No, right?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I get that in the next one.
Yes and no. If you are
it depends.
New,
yeah.
Private pilot, it's probably good to check and do.
Absolutely.
If you are an experienced pilot, you should do flows and then back it up with the checklist.
Well, I can skip 12 sides now. That sums it. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's perfect. That's exactly it, right? When you need to be dependent, right? In the early days, you still aren't used to. Your muscle memory isn't there yet. If your muscle memory isn't there, absolutely use the checklist. Remind yourself of the checklist, right? And so, what's the point, right? Exactly what Peter said. I'm just going to leave it at that because you said it perfectly. So from that, using the POH based as a base, right? Because obviously that's our legal. That's what we have to abide by, right? You can improve to meet your needs. Okay, so let me ask you guys, what are things that you would add to a personal checklist? It's your airplane, and you want to build it upon. What are some things off the top of your head you would want to have on there? Yeah, exactly. And a lot of flight schools on top of that, I'm flying out of Minuteman, and their manufacturer checklist, it's great, right? And they have little pencil marks in there too, like, hey, do this, do that, right? And I've seen pictures of checklists like that, and there's just arrows everywhere, and it's like little drawing circles and all this stuff. It's bad, obviously, not that much, but add it to your your personal flow. The spot unit is a perfect thing. So that's not a legal minimum, but it's fantastic for here, right? Another thing would be you could say file your flight plan. You could say close your flight plan, right? Those are the basics, some basic ones. One that I actually really enjoyed was when I was doing aerobatic training, and a part of their it was it pre-takeoff or pre-start? I think it was pre-engine start. The very last item was cameras on. Because everybody records their aerobatic lessons, right? So they just put it in the checklist. Remind your camera, right, to turn it on, which I thought was pretty cool. So again, the checklists are there as a minimum to build upon it, right? And then, the checklists are there for us to be safe per the manufacturer, and we can build upon it to make us even safer or make us more efficient or remind us in whatever way we want, right? And we have that freedom as general aviation. So in regards to SOP standardizations, right, some kind of professional level stuff, higher level stuff, anything that you guys might add off the top of your head? Exactly. Yeah, equipment procedures, exactly. Yeah. So like a garment or like a spot unit, of course, but like I fly with a Sentry, right? Having the Sentry or the ADS-B receivers, right? Exactly. Perfect. So again, we can personalize them in the GA world. We can personalize them to fit your needs, and you can make them new and modern and easy to use. Paper, laminated. Let me grab my checklist here. Make them modern or electric, right? ForeFlight. ForeFlight is a phenomenal tool. And you can. There's so much that you can do with it. A lot of people just scratch the surface, but you can build full electronic checklists in there. And the best part about that is it's easily manipulated. Like you're going through your flow and you do your checklist on ForeFlight, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, that's a hiccup. I don't really like that flow. So on the spot, you can just edit it, make your flow better. It's amazing. You can add charts and diagrams. So this is the infringing checklist on people's freedoms. This is what it looks like right here. Nice and color-coded. How dare I, right? References, it's blue. There's some performance indications and also red for emergency, right? So how dare I infringe on people? But I also added these charts, right? Because in this club, we had instructors that had 2,000 hours, 3,000 hours, and we had brand new private pilots, right? So you can always have more information. You'd rather have more information than not, especially in the age of everything is contained on here, right? You can have, this thing's 60 gigabytes, whatever, of data, 100 gigabytes of data. That's a lot of data. That's a lot of data you could have. So I'll pass this around here. You guys can check it out. What's that? Google Docs. Word. Google Docs or Word document. You just build on, that's version 5. The first one was not that pretty. But yeah, you can just build it around, and then you send the file to Office Depot or what's the other one, Staples, and they'll print it out for you, and you just say, can I laminate this and can I bind it? And they'll do it all for you. And it's like $5. It's crazy, and it's nice and new, and that sort of thing. So continuing with the checklist talk, right? So what Peter said, memorization is good depending on your experience, right? So memorization is good, but with a caveat. And what do I mean? And Eric can attest to this, actually. Just like a couple weeks ago, we were flying, and he, you're to the point, you're check ride prep right now, right? So you got everything. And if you don't mind me sharing, just say everything he's failed at, every hard landing. I'm just kidding. So, no, Eric, when he first started, and he'll say this, his brain runs 1,000,000 miles an hour. But his hands do not, right? And so I could see him. I jokingly say I needed to get a ruler to slap his wrist, because I could see him. He would go through his checklist. He was going through his flow. Boom, 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 boom. His head was going. I could see the skid marks, trailing behind his brain, kind of thing. And he would go, okay, mixture and flaps, and then he would just hold it right there, and he'd hold his finger, and he would continue going this checklist, and then he would hop on the yoke again. And so I'd have to slap his finger or say, hey, stop, right? Get back. His head was ahead of the airplane, right? Which is most of the time good, but when your muscles can't keep up, there's no point, right? Because then you can sit there and just spin all day long. So now I've said his muscle memory is caught up, and now he's still going 1,000,000 miles an hour, And so the other day we were flying, and he was like, okay, I got to do my checklist. And he was like, okay, everything started happening. We were in a situation where, I don't know, the approach come in and the Missoula just started becoming a little faster than usual. And so he was going to his checklist, and I was like, fly the plane. And he goes, you're right. And he turned his phone off. I'm not for dramatic use. He took his phone and chucked it in the back, and he started flying the plane. And it was a perfect landing, right? And that just goes to prove that you can have your flows but not be reliant on it, right? So memorization is good, but with a caveat, and that's what I mean, right? You do not want to, well, vice versa here. You don't want to fixate, and you don't want to be too relaxed on it, right? Because, and I'm as guilty as ever, as anybody, flying the same plane, you have hundreds of hours in the same plane, and you know the startup procedure, and then you know the taxi procedure, and you know the takeoff procedure, and you know this procedure. You don't necessarily habit go to the checklist anymore because you're like, oh, it's in here. Zoom, 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 zoom. And over time, it's bitten me in the butt. Luckily, I've never had an incident or an accident. However, it's like, ooh, that could have been bad. I caught it, right? And that's the whole point, is do your flow, do your memorization, be ahead of the airplane. And when you have a second, always back it up with the checklist. So creating flows, always return to your checklist to verify, right? There's no shame in your checklist. No shame. Absolutely no shame. And anybody, usually keyboard warriors, that tell you otherwise, they're wrong. Don't listen to them. So how does the professional world do that? I forgot to not click it out, but Peter can attest to this. The professional world. How does a crewed environment, and maybe Peter tried to let them answer on this, but a crewed environment, anybody know what's the challenge response method? How do they run checklists in a crewed environment? Anybody? Peter?
Well, if you have a challenge like seatbelts, fastened would be the answer. Mm-hmm. So the guy calling the checklist would say seatbelts, and if you're doing a crew environment, usually the captain, fasten left, mm-hmm. fasten right. That makes both people know that they're completely taken care of.
Absolutely.
Then you go on to the next one. So you just say the challenge portion, and then you come up with the answer. That is when you're familiar enough with the checklist. Okay. Oftentimes when I have somebody new in an airplane, I'll read both the challenge and response, expect them to come back with the response.
Absolutely.
Until they learn it.
Exactly what Peter said. So the challenge response, it's pilot flying versus pilot monitoring, pilot not flying, however you want to say it, captain, co-pilot, right? So in that crewed environment, now in the 135, what we did is we would alternate pilot flying, pilot not flying, and basically what the difference would be is I think for SIC, usually it's like you alternate either passengers or no empty leg, because we had a lot of empty leg in the private world. Airlines don't have empty legs usually that often. So the challenge response method is really good because when you get into that flow, the pilot not flying is heads down in the checklist, reading the response. And the pilot flying or captain, whoever it is, he's doing the flows and checklist, eyes up, flying the airplane, right? You always have someone running systems and procedures, and the other person is always in charge of the airplane, right? So what if you're single pilot? How can we add this layer? And obviously, How can you add it? How would you add it if you were a single pilot? How would you do that same challenge response method? Absolutely. Who here has been flying? Maybe it's just me, but who here has been flying? You're completely by yourself in the airplane, and you're calling up, and Tower asks you a question or whatever, and you say, "We would like." Well, I mean me and my airplane, right? So you're always talking to yourself, right? Doing your flows, right? So for a startup procedure on a 172, for example, you're doing your flows, mixture, throttle, carb, ignition's off, master's on, prime, whatever you need to do, start, and then do your flow. And then after the engine's at 1,000 RPMs, you grab your checklist, say, yep. Ooh, I forgot the prime. Ooh, well, it started, it's okay. That sort of thing. Obviously, there's more severe cases like that. So we talked about CRM. CRM is not just for the pros. You can fly, like Bruce said. You can fly with other pilots, and as long as you always have a learning mindset, an open mindset, you're going to learn something, no matter what. I don't care who it is. If it's someone less hours than me or more hours than me, sometimes people just say the right thing, and it perfectly works. And I'll give an example of this. Well, it's not really a crew environment, but in regards of saying something, even though you're saying the same thing. I had a student once. She couldn't get landings. She was a helicopter pilot, and she couldn't really get her landings right out the gate doing her fixed wing transition. And then she went to, I think she actually went to Choice, and she flew a 152 and was able to nail landings all of a sudden from a 172 to a 152. And he said the exact same thing I was saying, which is, keep your eyes up, stare at the end, hold it off. I think I said, don't let it land is what I used to say. And that guy said, hold it off. And for some reason, hold it off clicked for her, even though it is the exact same verbiage, right? The exact same topic, yet then all of a sudden she was able to land. And this happened with Eric, actually. Again, not to bring Eric up again. He started getting into a slump, right? Everybody has a plateau in their training, and every single one, I don't care who you are, you always plateau. It's a matter of your study habits and the instructor to get you out of that plateau. And Eric was going through this plateau, and my mentor said something to me that I was like, why haven't I said it that way? I said it to Eric, boom, and that clicked for him. And so what that was eyes up, nose up. Keep your eyes up out of the, get at the end of the horizon, and get your nose up as well. Eyes up, nose up worked for him. Keep it off the, don't let it land, keep it off the ground, whatever the case may be. And so flying with other people, right? You want to have an open learning mindset, right? Proper crew resource management, where the challenge response method, try to seek some training first how to properly do it. Because I've also been in situations where two CFIs, and you don't really have a proper brief. And so right when you go to fly, and then one person's not flying, the other person's not flying as well. And then, and then you look at each other, are you flying? Are you flying? Right? So, seek training how to properly do it. And actually, I got a task for you guys at the end of this, if we have time, which should be fun. Okay. So how can we bring this back to the accident rates, right? The easy answer is get back to the basics, build a strong foundation, right? The idea is not to add just layer upon layer upon layer where you become overwhelmed, but it's to help you improve your flying. Do that one step at a time if you really need to. Build it over time. Don't feel like you have to jump in right away. So for example, what I like to do is I like to build hard parts during, hard points during the flight that triggers your memory items, such as takeoff, taxi, landing clearances, final descent state. These things, if you're flying, well, that's the only mandatory one. But, if you get off the ground, all of these are mandatory, right? These are things that are happening every time, no matter what. I don't care where you are, right? So use those to build upon foundations, right? So taxi, right? Okay, brief for taxi. That should be your taxi brief. Clear for takeoff. That should trigger your departure briefing, right? Your final descent phase should trigger your I'm going to commit to landing phase, right? So this layer that I want to talk about is standardization, right? Now, we already have standardization in GA, but how do they do it differently? We were talking about SOPs, right? So standardization, the definition of standardization is developing, promoting, possibly mandating standard-based and compatible technologies and processes within the industry, right? Airlines obviously take that to a very extreme. I'm pretty sure the airline world, the aviation world, I did, it was in college. One of my teachers told me about this. I forget what it was. Aviation, in regards to the amount of risk that they have, I think is calibrated or calculated on the same playing field as nuclear engineering. There is so much risk involved because in the airline world, you have two 747s, for example. What is the Banner Reef, right? The Banner Reef accident. If you guys haven't heard about that and you want to be sad for one night, look up the Banner Reef accident. Basically, two 747s collided with each other head on the runway. And I mean, gut-wrenching. But what happens to that, right? And so that is obviously very extreme scenarios. Nuclear engineering, right? Nuclear power plants go off. That's extreme scenarios. However, it's not every day you hear a plane crash or you hear a nuclear reactor go off or whatever, right? And it's because of the high levels of standardization both industries have, right? Major risk, major standardization, right? Does that make sense? So going forward, how does the professional world standardize, right? So I kind of thought these are just some things I thought about. Operationally standards, they have weather standards, equipment standards, training standards, right? So operational flows and checklists, which is what we've been talking about, memory items, flight planning. They have flight planning standards, right? So, in the airline world, you have dispatchers and you have all these regulations in the flight planning states, but you have to have, X amount of criteria met to make a flight plan, right? Fuel requirements, obviously fuel requirements, not 30 minutes VFR anymore. It's a lot more complicated than that. Weather, right? Max wind. They have max wind requirements. Minimum visibility requirements. Most of them do. Cloud minimums, crosswinds, etc. Right? So, and I actually fun fact about the Phenom with the crosswinds, and I'm assuming it would be the same for other airliners, is the crosswind component's not necessarily as a demonstrated for wind, but it's for compressor stall on the downwind runway engine. Is that right, Peter?
We didn't talk about that.
No, you didn't? Okay. No. So on the Phenom, we had a 25 knot max crosswind because maybe it's because of the engines being on the tail, right? The Phenom would have a compressor stall, which basically the engine would stall out with a 25 knot crosswind. So super fascinating. What else? Equipment, flight bags like iPads. Nowadays, EFBs are a very standardized thing. A part of that, battery levels, right? You can't be dispatched. We, at Summit, I think it was 80%. We couldn't dispatch a flight if our iPad was less than 80% charged. Kind of crazy, just things you don't think about. Backup devices, we had some standardizations for backup. That if it was 80% less, you had to have, XYZ criteria, right? Let's see here, training standards, recurrent training. We kind of have that with our BFRs and currency, that sort of thing. Seminars, publications, and the list goes on. So adding it to GA, what are some, and I've kind of talked about this, but what are some SOPs that you would add just off the top of your head? What would you want to add into your daily flying, or what is something that you do every time you go fly, no matter what? Anybody?
I always repeat to myself after I've taken off what I was taught. Pitch power trim.
Pitch power trim.
One of the things, and there's several things like that.
Absolutely.
That SOP.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
They're really memory committed.
Yep.
You don't need a checklist to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes perfect sense. Pitch power trim.
It does. It does. No, it's easy, right? Pitch, and it's a step. 1, 2, 3, right? And then ideally, it's all good. Eric. Okay, I wasn't going to throw you in the bus, but now, yeah. What's the other thing? So instead of pitch power trim, what's the other one that I talk about all the time? Eric.
Uh-oh. I'm busy. What's the question again, please?
Pitch power trim.
Pitch power trim.
And what else do I say? What else do I say?
Stop it.
Stop that. The other 3 things.
Yeah, you are throwing me under. Other 3 things.
And okay, I'll throw you. Aviate, navigate, communicate, right? We've all heard that one, right? Aviate, navigate, communicate, right? At the end of the day, you always fly the plane. Think back to that first slide, right? The most fatal accident is loss of control in flight. How do you lose control of an airplane in flight? Because you stop flying the airplane, right? Which we'll talk about here in a second.
Before you take off, I always say, if I lose the engine and this lower this altitude, where I'm going to land.
Absolutely.
Make that decision before I go.
Absolutely. Yeah, departure briefings. Absolutely. I threw a mic departure briefing for you guys too, so a lot of that, but I'm going to talk about it. Exactly. So some examples that are kind of commercial level, but again, all these things I learned from my own mistakes because I do these, and I talk about personal minimums here in a little bit. That personal minimums, like you build it and you expand your personal minimum and you expand it, because you're a student pilot. It's like, I don't want to go more than 20 miles away. 21 miles is scary. That's no man's land out there. And then you go 21 miles and you're like, ooh, this is nice. I like this over here, right? And it's something new. And then all of a sudden now you're pushing yourself, and I'll tell the story here in a little bit. All of a sudden you're pushing yourself, and I took the summer or the spring, I took that 182 on a cross country, a very long cross country, 10 days. I took it down to pretty much all the way down to LA and back up the coast. I mean, that's an insanely long cross country over a 10-day period, right? I ran into some trouble, which I'll talk about. But some other examples are eyes down. The planes need to be stopped. So what does that mean? You have the checklist in your hand. The plane is stopped. I don't care. You're not rolling. You're not doing anything. The plane is stopped. You're doing checklists, right? You're on the runway. I think, no configuration changes on the runway. I'm guilty of this as ever, of course. But what does that come down to? Anybody know where that usually comes from? That too. Yep, we've all done that. But on the runway though.
I think one I was talking about earlier. My CFI Ray Eastwood, when he was here, he taught me one was called lights, camera, action.
Yep.
Before takeoff. Now I'm talking about it. I'm trying to remember it, but I remember. I think it had to do with nav lights, landing light, and all that. And the camera, I think, had to do with flaps and trim takeoff, set for takeoff. Yeah. And then action, I think, was you're ready
Yeah.
More better than mine.
Eric?
Bad mixture in there too.
Yeah, exactly. We always taught down in Summit lights camera. I taught it lights camera. Everybody, you can always teach it every different way, right? Lights camera action for me is, especially if you have a mode C transponder, is landing lights on, your lights on, whatever you need to do. Camera, turn it, make sure your transpond, you're broadcasting your location, and action is clearing, right? That's how I do it. Again, it's 1,000 different ways to throw whatever in.
How do you know configuration change if you're doing a touch and go from full flaps to takeoff flaps?
That's good. That's good. So obviously in that scenario, you have to, right?
Or cow flaps open to close.
Cow flaps open and close, right? In that scenario, you absolutely have to. This is mainly for you land and you're ready to get out of the airplane. You're trying to rush out of the airplane, right?
Oh,
Now, that being said, to be honest, I'm training Eric in the 182, right? It's pretty rare that we do a touch and go, right? We do mostly stop and goes. And the reason why is I want, for one, Eric to be able to, and my student, right, to be, calm and say, okay, I'm ready to go. Because that was one thing I hated when training was just like, you're slam and go, slam and go, slam and go, slam and go, right? And so I want it to be stopped. I want you to be calm. I want you to be ready for the next flight or the next departure. On top of that, with the 182, it's not just flaps and power, right? It's flaps, carb, cow, mixture, prop. You have all these things that could go wrong. And luckily we don't have a, retractable landing gear, because you add that on top of the list too. That's mainly where this comes from. Because I don't know if you guys knew this, but I'm sure some of you guys know, but flaps and, at least I believe the history of it is flaps and gear used to look identical, and they used to be right next to each other. And so what you do is you go and you hit the flaps, but you actually hit the gear, and you're still light on the wheels, and you suck the gear up, right on the runway, right? Now they do the best that they can, try to keep them far apart, but flaps look like a flap, and gears look like a wheel. So aircraft lights, another one. So I have a lot of standards with aircraft lights that I'll talk about, and then electronic flight bags, right, battery level. I'm not going to go if my batteries are dead, or obviously I'm going to go if I don't need it, but if I am dependent on it, I need to charge my iPad, right? And if I can't have my iPad charged up, I better make sure I have a way in the cockpit to have a battery bank, a car outlet, whatever the case may be, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have like 30 in there right now. I also like to give it out to my friends too. It's like, oh, because crappy noise canceling sucks. Or now that we're used to it. Okay, again, think back to personal minimums, right? As you gain that experience, you have a tendency to become more and more relaxed with these. Every pilot does this. I don't care who you are. As you build that proficiency and you build that comfort level, you're going to go a little farther. I have a great example of this. I have a buddy down in Bozeman who has a 182, a straight tail, whatever, that's a 50s model. And he's a private pilot, great guy. He's got really good mentors. And he was kind of, when him and I first started talking and becoming friends, like he would go on long cross countries, but he wasn't like 250 mile was 250 was a long ways away for him, right? And I would help him through, and I was like, well, hey, send me your flight plans. I'll review it. Sure, I want my friends to be safe, right? I'll help you out. And basically going forward from there, he just slowly built his experience over time, right? And as he built that experience, he was able to go farther and farther. And then he got to the point where he pushed himself. He went on a cross-country flight to Boise from Bozeman, and he flew direct, which is fine, but it's not great, right? And I told him, I was like, what are you doing? And he was like, oh, it's fine. I'm at 11,000 feet. I'm like, okay, there's going to come a day where you're going to start dialing that back, right? Because you push and push until something goes wrong, usually. Okay, more standardizations. Runway. This is the taxi brief. This is a pretty straightforward one. I actually got this from Pilots Cafe. If you guys don't know Pilots Cafe, you need to look them up. They are so insanely cool training tools. They basically are just summaries. Pilots Cafe. The IFR one especially is amazing. You could actually teach yourself how to fly instrument just out of that. It's 32 pages. It's phenomenal. So taxi brief. Assign route. Assign. That's supposed to say runway. Assign route, runway. I'm confusing myself. Assign runway, route, crossings, hold shorts, and hotspots. Okay. So you get cleared for taxi, and we're here. What do we do? North Star, you're going to go to Alpha 3, right? Minuteman, you're going to go to Golf. That's what's here, right? That's actually a very non-standard procedure. Most airports will send you down to the end, right? And every single airport has their own little training tool or training technique that every single airport does it different, every towered airport. So what I want to basically try to convince you of today is I don't care if you've done 1,000 golf via golfs. I don't care. Or Alpha 3s. I don't know North Star's tattoo out that one. But for Minuteman, golf via golf. If you've done it 1,000 plus times, I don't care. That 1,001st time that they say, go Alpha 3 cross, 2-6, you're going to be, okay, I'm going to go golf via golf because that's what I've done for the last 1,000 times. And then all of a sudden, potentially, you could get a runway incursion. Let's say they have an Alaska airline or a Delta trying to get off on it all, right? And all of a sudden, now you're right in the way of a big airline. If you got a pissed off tower guy, that's not going to be a good day. So you should always write it down, right? Improve your shorthand, which is something I'll talk about here in a sec. For the departure briefing, like you talked about, right? Picking a field above a certain altitude. Break it down 4 ways, right? First off, these 4 ways. But first off, departing runway. I'm taking off runway 30, especially here, intersection departures, right? Especially here, right? You do not want to get confused on yourself and take off the wrong way. That's a bad day. Very bad day. Distance, if you want to throw this in, right? These are high level stuff, right? In the jet, you're going to say assigned runway, route, departure, distance remaining, distance to take off, right? That sort of thing. You're going to talk about that. You can add that. That's a good thing to know. But in the GA, you can kind of still use a rule of thumb saying, okay, I have this much distance left. I'm going to probably go in about this much thousands of feet, right? However you want to do that. Failures. Wheels on ground, wheels off ground, and above. That's what that stands for. This is what I do. And this is pretty standard. This is actually comes from our charter company as well as the flight school and how I teach. Wheels are on ground before takeoff. So this is basically before rotation. You're going to abort, stay on the center line, and stop, right? So I call before the wheels leave the ground, abort, 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 remain on center line, stop on the remaining runway. Wheels off the ground with runway remaining. If you're in single engine, multi-engine's different story. Pitch down, land on the remaining runway. Pitch down is the most critical thing you can talk about. It sounds scary because you're 50 to 500 feet off the ground and you don't want to pitch down. The ground's right there. Pitching down is to the ground, but you need to fight that urge, right? You need to fight that urge, get down, because pitching down equals airspeed. Airspeed equals not stalling, right? So pitch down, land on the ground. Without runway remaining, you're going to pitch down, kind of what you said, look for a landing spot 30 degrees off your side, right? And then I used to do a lot lower, flying the DA-20s, the Diamonds. They're little they're gliders, like they're fiberglass, max takeoff is 1,700 pounds. I mean, they're light little trainers. I used to say, and in fact, one of my instructors actually did this one day. We had a good day to do it. You could do an impossible turn at as low as like 600 feet. Don't. You shouldn't. That's bad, right? Because you get in a high stress environment. In a training environment, it's way different. You're in a calm, controlled atmosphere, right? So above 1,000 feet, let's just call it pattern altitude. Just make it standard, right? Make it standard. Don't say, well, ands, if, buts. 1,000 feet, return to land. Here, we're really grateful because we have 826. Yeah, keep it.
Got an issue on that 1,000 feet return.
Okay, yeah.
It depends upon how fast you climb.
That's true.
Some people climb at the speed of heat, going 100 knots, and by the time they're 1,000 feet, they're off over Alberton.
That's true.
There's no way they're going to make it.
That's true.
Like in the 182, it says climb at 80 knots.
Mm-hmm.
That'll get you up fairly close to the airport, so you could at 1,000 feet return.
Of course.
You fly out at 100 knots, ain't going to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is obviously barring normal procedures, right? And if you're that's a perfect example. I flew with a guy with a Mooney where his VY speed was like 110, something like that. We were doing the Grizzly or something to 7,800 feet. And we were just going like this. I was like, are we climbing still? Are you sure? He was like, oh yeah, we're climbing. So exactly. No, that's a good point. So make it unique to your airplane, right? Obviously every procedure, right? 1,000 feet is, rule of thumb for standard operations, normal takeoff, climbing up out of the traffic area, right? So bringing it back to accidents, think back to this chart, right? How many of these might have been more vulnerable if you had more standardization, right? If you had more SOPs, for example. Loss of control, possibly. That's a possible for that one. Loss of control is more situational awareness and your control of flight. Abnormal runway contact. I would argue that that's probably something that's a pretty standard standardization. Something could get rid of that. Fuel related. 100% that all of these, this should be 0. The fact that it's not is it, well, okay, it shouldn't be 0. It should be close to 0, right? Outside of obviously your fuel pump fails, your whatever, you know, whatever. But lack of fuel planning or, you know, forget the cap, that should be lower, right? Non-power, I would assume that's glider. Collision on takeoff or landing, that should be lower, right? You know, brief your takeoff, brief the situational awareness, runway incursions. Obviously, you can't control it all, but it can help. Controlled flight into the terrain, right? Don't be boondocking it through the, you know, scud running, you know, that sort of thing. That, I think that's probably pretty controllable as well. But that also, I have, you know, all the time at 45,000 feet. I kind of like being up high. Altitude is my friend. I like altitude, right? I get a lot of bush pilots or friends of mine. They make fun of me all the time because if I get below 10,000 feet, they make fun of me. Okay, low altitude operations, obviously set altitude mins, you know, and sometimes those aren't, you know, avoidable, of course, but unintended flight into IMC, obviously unintended, it's an accident, but if you have good weather minimums, hopefully that should be more of a, you know, issue or less of an issue. Overshoot, undershoot, obviously that happens, but staying calm in that, you know, and obviously bird strike, you can't control that. But probably a lot of these here in this mid category probably could have been lessened quite a bit if everybody just adds a little bit of standardization into their flying. Largest factor in PA or in GA is pilot, right? We are the majority of the problem, hypothetically, right? So you don't have to go crazy. Don't govern yourself again. I'm not here to infringe on your freedoms, but I'm here to encourage safety, right? Okay, but even just being aware of it helps. Okay, now, pen and paper and EFBs. Why should you use something to write down no matter what, right? We kind of talked about the golf via golf thing, right? Regardless of experience, why is it important to write down instructions? I think I kind of covered that a little bit, right? That the 1,001st time that it's something different, you may not know it, right? It's the same landing. I mean, it's happened to me, especially if you're a flight instructor, especially if you're just in the ground, you're flying all the time. That is so important. And it's crazy. I have lots of friends that, like, the FAA kind of understood the situation, but they got violated, or they violated, you know, regs because it was just that 1,001st time, and they just kind of got complacent on it, right? Nothing against them. You know, you're in the grind. I get it, but that's why it's important, right? So what should we be writing down? Anything you feel important. Perfect. Easy, right? Taxi clearances, runway clearances, frequency change, weather, etc., right? These are things that when you're, especially if you're in a heated, under pressure situation, which I'll talk about in a sec, when you're flustered, you're trying to fly the plane, you need to fly the plane, but then all of a sudden now you're flustered trying to get radio frequency. What was that frequency again? Where was I taxi, right? You can just look down, it's like, right, boom, trust yourself, right? Yeah.
I know coming in from Lolo all the time, I know what they're going to say, and I always write it down.
Yeah.
And the other day I caught myself because I'd written it down, but my brain was thinking something else.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm going, I look down, why did I write that?
Exactly. Exactly.
and then I call them and they say, well, yeah, that's what we said.
Exactly. 100%. Exactly. Yeah, good. Okay. So getting better shorthand is kind of a part of it, right? So who uses shorthand? Anybody know who knows what shorthand is? No? Okay. So Peter, here, uses shorthands, right? Airline guys. So shorthand, right? And then how confident are you, right? So if you guys don't use it, probably not too confident, right? Shorthand, the way I explain it, it's kind of like your signature. It should kind of just be a part of you. It's like talking on the radio is a little bit of a different language, but your signature should just be your signature, right? You just know it. You have the same routine all the time, and it takes a little bit of practice getting into that. It takes a little bit of practice to actually figure out what works and what doesn't, but you should try to get to that. And one way you can do it is just listen to the radios on your phone and just practice shorthand, right? Go to O'Hare and practice shorthand from other pilots, right? Like, it's, you know, you can do whatever you want. You guys saw those there. Let's see if it does it. Yeah. So, this is just something I recorded from the other day, right? This is a METAR. This is a taxi clearance, right? 30 Alpha 3, Golf Alpha. You can kind of see me questioning myself there in cross 26. And I put the -A because one of the tower guys likes to say cross 26 on Alpha, right? So it's like, okay, might as well. I'll throw that in. Sure, on Alpha. That makes sense. And then wind's calm, right? I'm pretty like quick about it. So, you know, calm, 9 miles viz, 11,000 broken. Sometimes when it's like 10 overcast, it gets a little confusing because it's 100, right? Temperature dew point. You practically just copy a METAR, right? So being confident on your shorthand can be huge and very beneficial. So taxi diagrams are not just for taxiing, right? We should always be using them. Even like I still use them here at Missoula, even though you know golf via golf. I'd rather have it and be like, have it there again and have, especially with ForeFlight, my GPS overlay, seeing exactly where I am. Also, I kind of just like seeing my airplane move, right? So they're not just for taxiing. You can use it for becoming situationally aware, right? So you can click the glance. It's like, another airplane calls out a North Star and they're going to a different location. You can instantly see where they are. And even if they're not popping up on traffic, you can just, where they are, right? Hotspots, even if, our airport doesn't have hotspots, but Bozeman has hotspots. Who remembers what hotspots are? Accidents occur, right? Exactly. It's high volumes of traffic, right? So you want to be extra vigilant. You should be extra vigilant everywhere, but especially in those spots, right? FBO locations. I can't tell you how many, and route billing, right? I can't tell you. So use your pen EFB to not only write down taxi clearance, but to draw your route on the airport. ForeFlight. Who's used the taxi route tool on ForeFlight? I think it might be a pro subscription. I don't remember or not. The taxi route tool is awesome. I love the taxi route tool. It takes your location, right? Or not, you can plan it based on that. But if you're in the airplane, it can take your location and you put down your taxi clearance, right, as it's happening, and it will draw you a path. Now, this says that they're in the beta testing part, so obviously rely on your actual notes, but it's a phenomenal tool. And if you can say cross, you're clear to cross, that has a little green circle. If it wasn't clear, this whole back section would be red. So you can always know, it's like, oh, where was my route? And you follow your route. It goes one farther. ForeFlight does a really cool job. They also put it on the aeronautical section on your sectional. So now all of a sudden on your map, you can see where you are, which is super cool. And if you really want to go farther, you can put your plate overlaid on the sectional with your taxi route. It's awesome. And here, Gulf Alpha, okay, what's the big deal? But when I've landed at O'Hare and LAX, and like those are big airports, but not even that. Spokane's a complicated airport. Pretty much anywhere other than your home airport is going to be complicated, especially if they have more than 2 taxiways, right? So having that route is just, it saved me many, many times. Let's just say that. Sterile cockpit, obviously. Who knows what sterile cockpit is, right? What do the airlines say? What's their rule that we hear? Right, Peter?
1,000 feet. Sometimes they'll go to 10.
10, right? Most nowadays it's like 10. 10,000 feet. Well, in GA, especially in the 152, good luck, right? You're probably never going to talk during the whole flight, right? So instead of saying 10, right? The airlines use it. How can we use it? Instead of saying 10, right? It's a long way up there not to talk. I like to talk. But so that doesn't mean we still can't use it, right? Sterile cockpit on the ground, easily. In towered airspace, boom. On approach, VFR or IFR, just stop talking, right? Because that's an important phase of flight. You can even say below a certain AGL, right? If you're a bush pilot, right, or going to Moose Creek, like you said, like there's going to be a section where you're not necessarily in the approach section, but you're still pretty close to the ground. That's going to be very important because CFIT is a part of those accidents, right? There's a large part of that. Okay. Questions so far on any of that? Makes sense. Cool. So in cockpit cues, I'm actually the most excited about this because this is what I like the most. Cues for yourself and reminders in the cockpit. What items in the cockpit would you use for like reminders? Reminders for anything you can think of. Anybody have an idea? So what I do is light switches, obviously heading bug, altitude bugs if you got them, distance rules. The light switches is what I actually love the most about. This is something that we incorporated in the flight school and then moving into the jet and even from there, it's just, I really enjoy it. Where'd it go? What? Oh, yeah. How professionals use them. So basically, taxi and landing lights. So they're fantastic, fantastic tools to remind you when you have or have not been cleared for something, right? So on the ground, clear for taxi light comes on. On the ground, clear for takeoff, landing light comes on, right? And so you don't ever have to second guess yourself and say, oh, was I clear for taxi? Was I clear for landing? That sort of thing. If they're on, because of your muscle memory and your habits, you should be clear. In the air, super important. Approaching high traffic areas, your taxi light comes on. Try to make yourself more bright. And the really big important one, in the air, you're cleared for landing, landing light comes on. If the landing light comes on, you know you've been cleared to land because there's been so many times. It's what happened to me in Bozeman. It's a rarity in Bozeman anymore. But I called up Bozeman over Three Forks, Whitehall, something. I mean, I was a long ways away. And they go, I forget what airplane I was in. They're like, yeah, clear to land, 1-2. That never happens to me. Okay, sure, clear to land, 1-2. And I tested it. I flew it all the way in. Of course, obviously, I'm watching other traffic and making sure no one's going to cut me off and they don't send somebody in front of me. But sure enough, landed. And they were watching me the whole time. They knew I landed. I knew I landed, right? Because that taxi light, or the landing light was on the entire time. It's pretty cool. I love that tool. Heading bugs and altitude bugs. If you have that, then great. And how you use them, keep track of where you're supposed to be, right? You should always be utilizing your heading bug, even if it's just a VFR, right? Helps reduce workload, flying to a box, right? So, and if you have fancy like electronic, setups and stuff, they'll ping at you. They'll, the more fancy you go, the more alarms they'll have, and it's really cool. If you don't have any bugs, I mean, shit, write it down. Maybe even put a sticky note up on the panel, something like that. You can do it that much too. But write down like headings or vectors or anything like that, altitudes, in controlled airspace. Obviously, just flying around, it's different. Yeah, Peter.
I tell people, as soon as you get your taxi clearance, set your heading bug on the runway for takeoff.
Absolutely. Yep. And especially intersections here, that gives you reference, because there's been days, I will admit, there's been days where you go for an intersection departure and it's like clear for 30, and I'm like, you're just like, how do I do it? I don't know which way to go. Oh, wait. Yeah. Okay. Heading bug. That's the way I go. Right. So really good. Okay. Professionals use the distance cues, right? So we had, and I don't remember exactly what they were, but we had distance requirements in our SOPs where you basically at certain distance, you start calling up the FBOs and, do other things like that. You can start running checklists at certain distance, right? Call for approaches, that sort of thing. So you can use that same, like an uncontrolled, the rule of thumb. You always call up 10 miles out from an uncontrolled field, right? The professionals use this to trigger checklists and procedures in regarding landings and briefings, right? So one thing that we do, I think actually is more appropriate, is like, you're 200 miles out in the jet or something like that. That triggers your, at that point, because you're moving so fast in the jet world, you can most likely brief your arrival and most likely brief your approach. It's most likely not going to change within that kind of realm, right? And so you can brief it, be prepared, write it down, be ready to go for when that happens. Okay. Going into recruitment training, obviously this is kind of obvious. We talk about GA safety. Actually, there, yeah. Read my question. So, what's the difference? Currency and proficiency. Exactly. Right. And so, what are ways that we go beyond our legal minimums? Right. Meaning, what are some ways that you can improve the proficiency side of things? Anybody?
Wings program.
Wings. Yep.
Flight review. More frequent than every 24 months.
Absolutely. I'm just going to skip the slide here for. No, I'm just kidding. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it should be done, right? Ways to do this, right? Create SOPs for yourself. Instead of 90-day, maybe do 60-day, maybe do 30-day. Obviously, it's personal. Essentially, this is personal minimums. And how do you develop your personal minimums, right? Go up with a CFI more than every 2 years. CFIs are your friend. We're not here to, tell you you're wrong. We're not here to reprimand you. We are here to learn and to teach and to help you learn as much as you want to learn, right? I truly, and especially actually a fun little fact for you. I should get off on that, not on that topic yet. I'm very passionate. Most CFIs are pretty passionate teachers, right? A lot of CFIs are. We're now in a phase, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole anyway. We're now in this phase right now, currently, as it stands right now, active CFIs. If you guys were to guess, how many of those active CFIs are 1 year old, 2 years old, 3, 4, 5 on, right? So let's say 1 year or less. How many CFIs out of all of them in fractions? How many do you think are out there right now that are less than a year old? Yep, it's right at 70%. Yes, 2/3. It's 2/3 of active instructors have less than a year under their belt, right? Crazy. Doesn't mean that they're bad, but it's crazy, right, to think about. But they are going to be eager to learn and eager to fly. That's what I'm trying to say here, right? So get up with them, learn something from them, maybe teach them something. Who knows, right? Having that positive mindset is so huge. And let me finish the slide and I'll talk about this. So coming to training events like this one, right? Like expanding your horizon on that regard. Read and study online material, articles that are posted. Learn from others' mistakes, right? Learn from, I mean, it's hard. It's a double-edged sword a little bit because you can get down the deep rabbit hole of listening to accidents and just get really sad. Don't do that to yourself. But learning from, okay, this accident happened, and how can I improve upon it, right? Don't sit there and say, well, I wouldn't have done that, because they probably said that exact same thing to the other guy, right? Sit there and say, how can I learn from this, and how can I do better, right? And then participates with the wings credits, like Peter said. I actually didn't really realize how good the wings credits were until about 4 or 5 months ago, and I signed up for it, and I'm like, man, this thing is sweet. I thought it was just for like kind of student pilots. I thought that's what it was. I had a complete wrong understanding of it, and I love the wings credits now. They're really cool. If you guys didn't know, wings credits can actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I learned this 4 months ago. If you do enough wings credits, that counts towards your flight review, right? Every 2 years. And I think you can even apply that towards your FERC as well as a flight instructor, right? Or a little bit, the ground portion?
The ground portion.
Ground portion, yeah. So crazy, right? Yeah.
There's also activities that you have to do to get credit for your flight review.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
not just watching the videos. It's you have to go with a flight instructor. And they have to sign it off in a certain way.
Exactly.
You did this training.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, it's why stop at the private pilot check ride? And we all know, Eric will soon know, that the private pilot check ride is good for what it is, but it only gets you this far, right? It is not the real world. It's not, right? And how can we go beyond the real world, right? It's continual training, continual education. So CRM, kind of finishing us up here. I have an exercise for you guys, but first I want to talk about it. CRM practice, we talked about crew resource management. We talked about with Peter, right? Challenge, respond method. Can be extremely rewarding, like I talked with Bruce here, but also extremely dangerous, right? We talked about the 200-hour pilots. I've been in those situations where, are you flying, right? It wasn't properly briefed, right? Inexperience can be just as dangerous as something that, as you by yourself, right? If not more dangerous, right? So you really want to be careful with the CRM, but again, pulling off true CRM is rewarding as hell. It is so fun bouncing off of your captain, especially, or like your pilot flying, pilot not flying, especially when you get in the flow. It is fun. It's super fun. So remember to always establish who is flying. That's the most important. If you were to sum this whole thing up, who is flying, pilot monitoring is very, very important. Recently, I went up with a guy in his airplane. It has retractable landing gear, and he had a problem. He was coming in to land and by himself one time. I forget the exact enunciator. He had an enunciator or something with the hydraulic system, right? And so I went flying with him, and on the ground, he was like, the hydraulic system came on, but by the time he came in into the FBO, it went away. It was like this weird flash of something. Not sure what it was. So we went out and we said, okay, let's brief. We briefed like 45 minutes to an hour. We said, okay, option A, option B, this is what we're going to do. We're going to check this. We're going to go through this pre-flight. We're going to go through this flow. We're going to go through these levels of standardization to make sure, for one, we can test it, but then two, make sure that we're covering our own butt, right, to try to be thorough, because hypothetically, we might be hopping in an airplane that the gear's not coming down, right? And so we wanted to prepare for that. And so, part of that was checking the hydraulic fluid, checking the enunciator. Once you were actually engine started, right, checking it had hydraulic flaps, so checking the flaps up and then trying to get the hydraulic sensor to go, right? It never went. We took off. It was fine. It turned out we talked to a mechanic about it that specializes in that, and he said it was it had something to do with the low idle. It was like the trifecta, the low idle, flaps, and gear down at the same time, just happened to have it triggered, but it wasn't actually anything. It might have been a bubble. It might have been something else, right? But it wasn't actually anything serious, right? Pretty interesting. But we did everything to prepare for that, right? Okay, going into Eastern Airlines Flight 401. Who's heard of it? Yeah, maybe?
Heard of it? Which one is that?
Okay,
Is that
so
the Florida Everglades?
Yep. So I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure. This is crazy. It was a 3-engine. What was that? 7.2, I think. Yeah. So major airline. I think it's a wide body, isn't it, or pretty damn close? Oh, sorry. It's a big airplane. Regardless, it's a big airplane. And 3 engines, big airplane. And I think there was 3 or 4. I don't remember. This was back in the 70s, so there was quite a bit of people in there, or captains-wise, right? Highly experienced crew. You can look it up with the details, but essentially the thing that you want to realize is they were doing a flight from New York to Florida. That doesn't matter. What matters is when they were going to put the landing gear down, one of the landing gear lights weren't turning on, right? And so they started fixating and trying to fix the problem. Cycle the landing gear, go through the emergency procedures. Nothing was working to get this landing light to turn green, which in a complex airplane, right, landing gear down green means the gear's down and locked. So if it's not on, that means that hypothetically the gear's not down, right? I think it was at night. I'm pretty sure it was at night. And so anyway, time goes on, however long it goes. I use this as a story as ever. They ended up crashing the airplane. It had nothing to do with the light. It had nothing to do with anything. They didn't even attempt to land. They went CFIT in Florida. They flew into flat terrain. How do you do that? How do you have, I think, 3 or 4 crew members on board, professional pilots? How does that fly into the ground? And I'll tell you even one more. I believe it was the NTSB concluded that the only thing wrong with that airplane was the landing gear position light bulb was burnt out. So a light bulb, probably a $100 part, a $20 part in experimental world, a $100 part, who knows, whatever that part is, crashed and killed whoever ran it, or however, I don't remember the accident statistics on what happened, but crashed an airplane, right? L-1011. So crashes a big airplane. I don't know how many people died. I'm sure people died. But the voice, one person died? 101. 101. Way worse. People died, obviously, because of a landing light bulb. And what happened with that, what they concluded, and now that we study that, basically what happened is all pilots got fixated on trying to solve the problem. And no one was flying the airplane. I'm sure it was warning them. I'm sure it was all, but they were so toned in to the fact that they might gear up this airplane, which would have been a way better outcome, that they crashed the airplane. I'm pretty sure the voice recorder said something like the last recording was, hey, are we supposed to still be at 2,000 feet? And I don't remember the exact is, but it's like something like, are we supposed to still be at 2,000 feet? Yeah, what do you mean? And that was like the last. And so, yeah, it's horrible, 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 right? 101 people suffered because of that, a dumb mistake. So back to CRM. Let me get to this here. Back to CRM, pilot flying, pilot not flying. So if you're going to fly, make sure that you have somebody flying, and you make sure, I was hoping for more people here, but this is good. I get to save people. Actually, you guys get one. You get one. I didn't think about this one. You guys get one. You guys get one. Hey, thanks for coming, guys. You get one. I'll partner up with you here. Okay. Or actually, no. He needs a partner. You want to come over here? Okay. So what this is just a basic checklist. I got it off the internet, right? Nothing fancy. Okay. Literally copied and paste, printed out 20 minutes or an hour ago. So pilot not flying. You guys established that. You guys were going to switch. Challenges the task. Pilot flying performs the task and says the task. Okay. So talk amongst yourselves really quick. Decide who's pilot flying, who's pilot not flying. But pilot monitoring? You said pilot monitoring?
The airlines used to say not flying. They've gone strictly away from that because it's monitoring.
Monitoring.
Not flying means you're checked out.
Oh, okay. All right. So pilot monitoring and pilot flying. Right. Okay. All right. So you guys determine, and we're going to go through this now. In the best case scenario, now whoever's flying, imagine the 172 in front of you. You're not allowed to look at the checklist. Pilot monitoring. Grab the checklist. Okay. So the best of your ability, I'm assuming everybody has 172 time or 152 equivalent, essentially, right? So the best of your ability, remember the flows. Say, start at the top, pre-flight, go through it, see how you guys do.
Pilot flying cannot look.
Pilot flying cannot look. Try to do it by memory item. Try to do the best you can. In college, let me see if I have anything else here before I go on. Actually, I didn't even tell any of my stories. All my other stories. So, conclusion here as we finish up and we'll chit-chat. As pilots and aviation enthusiasts, we should be representing ourselves highly, not only for our safety, but for the future, for all the future generation of pilots yet to come, right? We want to protect what we have now even more so, we need to protect it for our future, right? 100%. If we're passionate about that, like I am, like I want aviation, I want to be 100 years old and telling stories about how we did it back in the day, just like I listened to, you know, like our mentors from the previous, right? Remember the far end. Now this is the sad part, right? The far end is written in blood, right? So let's keep flying safe. We can keep enjoying some of the best freedoms that we have in the world. And if you guys need to contact me, there's me. So that's it. That's all I got for you guys.